All right, the second part of today's class, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the policy areas in the Olympic movement. So we're mainly going to talk about three areas. First one is the Olympic bidding process, and the second one we're going to talk a little bit about the doping issue. The third one, we talk about some of the strategy has been utilized by the IOC and to attract more younger generations to get involved in the Olympic movement. So we start with the Olympic bidding process first. So I don't know how many students are familiar with the Olympic biddings from the textbook to give you a brief idea about the Olympic bidding process. As we look at the Olympic Games in the last, we say, 120 years, so the Olympic Games at the very beginning were not that popular, right? But later, with the more people start participating in sport, with the development of the technologies, the Olympic Games are being able to watch on TV, and also particularly after Cold War, right? So Olympic Games, sports has been utilized by the government to enhance the patriotisms and nationalisms in most of the countries. So that made the Olympic Games become so big nowadays. Basically, it's one of the biggest events, not just in sports, and all the events as a whole in the world. So I was kind of curious about how many students actually know when was the last time for the U.S. to host the Olympic Games. How many Olympic Games has been hosted in the U.S.? Anyone know about this? Right. Every time when I ask these questions, the students give me different numbers. But actually, the U.S. has been hosted um, 8 Olympic Games in the past, including 4 summer games and 4 winter games. Right. Speaking of the 4 summer games, you find out the first game that took place in St. Louis, right, in 1904. So some students, if you had the chance to visit St. Louis, you go to the Washington University at St. Louis, you'll still be able to see the venues that was used for hosting the 1904 Olympic Games. Currently, it's become a training facility for the football teams there. So the interesting things about 1904 Olympic Games, initially, the Olympic Games was awarded to Chicago. But Chicago in the 1904 and was also hosting the nowadays we call Economic Olympic, which is World Expo. So since Olympic Games at that time wasn't very big at all, so Chicago decided to host the World Expo and give up the race of the hosting the Olympic Games. So St. Louis was became the first American city to host the Olympic Games. And later Los Angeles held the 2 Olympic Games, 1932 and 1984. So 1984 games in particular was the most successful Olympic Games in the history, because 1984 game was the first Olympic Games that actually can making profit in the Olympic history, and also change the entire business model how we organize the Olympic Games nowadays. And Atlanta hosted 96 summer game. So that was the last summer game that has been hosted in the U.S. The last winter games was the 2002 Salt Lake City's Olympic Games. If you look at the Olympic bidding history, you find out American cities are really interested in hosting or bidding for the Olympics. In 1980, 1948, 1952, 1956, right, more than one American cities were bidding for the Olympic Games. You can also tell at that time the Olympic bid process has not been formalized, and also is not as competitive as it is today, right? If you look at the Olympic bidding process in 1990s, in 2000, in 2010, you find out like more than 10 or 15 countries nowadays want to host the Olympic Games, right? With so many so many countries want to host the Olympic Games. So the Olympic bidding process has also experienced some changes. So in the past, the Olympic bidding process is each NOC recommend the city to bid for the Olympic Games first. So for instance, the U.S., maybe Boston want to bid for the Olympics. So ask them to contact USOC and let USOC to submit their bid to the IOC. Because the competition is very intensive right now, so each country is now to only select one city to make sure they have better chance to win this entire bidding process. So all the IOC members will determine the hosting city and the IOC sanction. So this is the rule has been used in the past. However, 2002 Salt Lake City Winter Olympic Games scandals changed the entire strategies. So in the past, all the IOC members, they could just go and visit any city if they want to be for the Olympic Games. So they create the possibilities of the corruptions issues. So in 2002 Salt Lake Olympic Games in particular, right? So after the investigation, so they found out Salt Lake Olympic Games bidding teams actually pay like nearly $4 million to these IOC members in order to win the bid for hosting the Olympic Games. For the exchanges, they have been receiving the vote and support from these IOC members. So when the scandal has been disclosed, obviously that was a big decision for the IOC to make is they really have to make the changes in the bidding process. So after Salt Lake City scandal, so IOC introduced the new bidding rules. In the new bidding rules, they ban all the IOC members from visiting the bidding city. So which means if Chicago is going to want to bid for 2032 Olympic Games, all the IOC members are not allowed to visit the cities officially. Of course, you can visit Chicago as a tourist, but you cannot visit the city as the IOC member and reach out to the local government to let them know, say, hey, we're having an official visit, so you cannot visit them officially. So that is the first thing they do. Second thing they do is, since IOC members cannot visit the Olympic hosting cities, how can those IOC members to know whether the city is ready to prepare the Olympic Games and deliver a successful games? So IOC decided to create an evaluation bidding committee with 4 members coming from 4 different countries. So these 4 members will represent the IOC members to visit all the Olympic bidding city for 4 days. During these 4 days visits, the bidding cities will show them the process they've been making for preparing, delivering the Olympic Games. And these 4 members will write a report, and then this report will be shared with all the IOC members 1 month before the votings, and all IOC members will, based on the report and their knowledge, to vote and decide which cities will be hosting the Olympic Games. Right. In order to minimize the problem and issue, they also create an independent ethics committee to oversee the entire process, to make sure all the voting process are fair and every bidding city has been treated fairly. So this is the rule has been introduced after the 2002 Salt Lake City's Winter Olympic Games scandals. So now the Olympic bidding process is, if the city want to bid for the Olympics, you have to go and submit your documents, and it's basically 9 years before the Olympics. So if 2032, if you want to bid for 2032 Olympics, so you have to submit that document nearly in 2022 and 23, and let IOC know that you have interest in bidding for that Olympics. So you go into the invitation stages. So invitation phase, IOC would do a brief evaluation, eliminate some of the non-qualified city, and leave 3 to 5 cities into with something we call the invitation stages. Entering into invitation stages, you become the candidate city. So you have to go to 3 different stages, submit all the information, explain why you want to have the Olympic Games in your home city, so whether you're ready for that, your government support, your support from the general publics, and also how you be able to keep the legacy of the Olympic Games. So you have to submit all the different documents, hundreds of pages, and then let them know about your preparation. And then IOC will make that decision 7 years ahead of the Olympic Games. So basically give the Olympic hosting city 7 years to prepare to deliver the most important sporting events in the world, right? So this is current Olympic bidding process. Right. We talk about Olympic Games was pretty big in 1990, 2000, right? So those 20, 30 years, particularly after the Cold War, because Olympic Games become a new platform where the country can compete against each others. Right. So, but also another big issue is with Olympic Games become bigger and bigger, the cost of hosting the Olympic Games has also increased significantly. Right. Here is the picture that show you the cost. Right. So this is the money has been outspent based on the budgets, particularly when we look at 2040 Winter Olympic that took place in Sochi. So the Russian government spent $50 billion in delivering Winter Olympic Games. So it's about $20.1 billion more than what they were planning for, right? So all the cities, right, they spent a lot more money than they were planning for. So now they think about the Summer Games had 34 sports, right? They have 28 regular sports, and another 6 sports been added to the 5 sports being added to the 2020 Olympics. So you have to host so many sports in one particular city. It's going to be very difficult, right? Particularly some of the facility you might build for the Olympic Games. How you're going to use these facilities after the Olympic Games has been debatable. A lot of discussion getting involved the cost of hosting the games. So IOC is also try to control the size, make sure the Olympic Games not go too big that a lot of cities are not be able to host it. So since the cost of hosting Olympic Games has been increased significantly, and also the global economic downturns happened in 2009, so a lot of cities bid for the Olympic Games, but also withdraw that bid in the last minute. So one of the big issues in 2004 or 2024 Olympics, initially there were 5 cities want to bid for the Olympic Games. So including Los Angeles, including Rome from Italy, Paris from France, Hamburg from Germany, and Budapest from Hungary. But 3 European cities, Rome, Hamburg, and Budapest, withdraw from the competition just like a few months before IOC making the final decision. So only got 2 cities left over from the race. So IOC also realized Los Angeles and Paris, both of them so qualified for hosting the Olympic Games. And since a lot of cities have a lot of concern for hosting Olympic Games, so IOC want to make a decision, say we need to we ask these 2 cities to see whether it's possible one city gonna host 2024 and one city is gonna host 2028. So that will minimize the potential problem. Is like when we have a 2028 Olympic bidding process and no city want to bid for the games, right? So the IOC decided to talk to 2 cities to ask them whether one city prefer to host 2024, one city prefer to host 2028. So they asked the Paris first, and Paris said no, we don't want to host 2028 games. If we lose the bid in 2024, we're not gonna bid for 2028 because a lot of facility we were planned to use for 2024 games would not be existing. And then they went to ask Los Angeles to see whether they want to wait for another 4 years for hosting the games. Los Angeles say, well, yeah, sure, why not? So we have all the facilities we need for the Olympic Games. We can wait for these 4 years. So, and in order to attract Los Angeles to host the 2020 games, IOC is also giving them like extra, like about $100 million to compromise his potential loss for not having 2024 games. So, and IOC decided to let Paris and Los Angeles to host. One city hosts 2024 and one city to host 2028, which is not common in the history, right? In the past, normally IOC would select each Olympic cities one time. So this is the one of the first time for the IOC select 2 cities for 2 Olympic hosting Summer Olympic hosting city at the same time. So these little stories behind the 2024 Olympic bidding process. So this is the first topic about bidding. Right, bidding is the most important decision have to make by the IOC. So the second questions about the Olympic Games is about young generations engagements. So IOC also realized one thing is younger generations, they're increasingly abandoning cable TV and traditional sports for the online video games and tournaments and esports. A lot of young people prefer not to play sports, and they would like to spend a lot of time playing video games, using computers, right? And also, Olympic Games viewership has been declined significantly, with more people decided not to watch watch Olympic through cable, but through the other platforms like internet platforms. So IOC has been thinking how we are able to continue to promote Olympic sports among younger generations, right? So there are a lot of different strategy has been utilized by the IOC, right? First strategy is they create Youth Olympic Games. That's something we talked about in our last part of the lecture, right? In 2010, they host the first summer Youth Olympic Games, right? They host summer and winter Youth Olympic Games, try to bring young athletes from all around the world together to compete in the one events. They help people to understand each other, how to promote sports. So that's the one strategy. The second strategy is they create Olympic channels. Right, they find out Olympic sport. People only care about it every 4 years. During these 4 years, so their news and coverage is very limited. The Olympic fans have no chance to watch their competitions on their TVs. So in order to deliver more contents, so they create Olympic channels, which they can deliver 24 hours contents about Olympic sports. Like people can watch all the different Olympic games, Olympic sports, World Championships, and important tournaments. Right, so that's the second strategy. The third strategy they will try to do is they try to add some new sport to the Olympic Games. Right, they find out some of the sports has been existing for many years, but the popularity has been declined significantly. Right, so they decided to remove those sports and adding some of new sports there. Right, you're using 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games as example. So they added 5 sports like baseball and softball. So baseball and softball initially was Olympic sports, but has been limited due to the low popularities. Right, so adding baseball and softball back to Olympic Games, like sports like karates, like skateboarding, like sport climbing, like surfing, those extreme sport pretty popular among youngsters has been added to Olympic Games. So they hope can use these strategies and attract people's attention. Younger generation can continue to follow the Olympic Games, not just winter, but also the summer. Right, so this is strategy has been used by the IOC. And one big discussion here is should they add e-sport to the Olympic Games? Right, people have a completely different opinion towards should they add e-sport to the Olympic Games or not. Right, esports pretty popular. A lot of young people like playing esport, watching esport, and it's become a pretty big business. So should they add it to Olympic Games? That's a big discussion. Right. First things is a lot of people don't think esport are sports. So how are you gonna define sports? That's, a lot of people think sport is about physical activity, but esport um, has nothing to do with physical activities, right? So should it be considered as a sport? So that's a big discussion. So what are the obstacles for esport being added to the Olympic Games? The first thing is they need to have international governing bodies, which esport does have one, right? Esport has an international governing body in 2008, right? International Esport Federation was founded, but currently they only have 56 members, which means the sport, although it looks popular, but it's not popular at all in the entire world. If you look at other Olympic sports like soccer, it has like 210 members for all around the world, but esport only have 56. So it's not truly popular around the world. So that is one of the issues. And you also need to enforce the rule and regulations of the Olympic movements. right? So which need to include like drug testing in the e-sport competition, which is also a big concern right now. So the second thing is e-sport is a pretty male-dominated activity, right? If you watch e-sport competition, you find a majority of participants are male. Very few female participants are pretty low, which is also contradict with IOC's principle, because for the last 10 or 20 years, more and more women's sport has been added to the Olympic Games. So, but e-sport, female participants is very, very low. So that actually hurt the possibility for the sport to be added to the Olympic Games. So, and the third thing is about e-sport. They promote violence, right? Unlike other sports, the studies show the more violent game you play, the person will become more aggressive and become more violent. So that is also a big concern for people adding this sport to the e-sport, to the Olympic Games. And also, e-sport had a lot of game develops involved. So basically, for the game develop, they might have the chance to manipulate the programs and impact the game's result, which might create an unfair competition, which is also a big concern. Any other concern from your perspective? So another concern maybe is e-sport. If you want to add e-sport to the Olympic Games, so the question is which e-sport game should be added to the games, right? Because currently there are so many different types of the e-sport games around the world. Should you add LOL? Should you add Rocket League, like Dota 2, PUBG? Why? And when you're adding these e-sport to the Olympic, whether it's unfair to other e-sport games, right? So those are also the big discussion and concern for the IOC to decide whether they want to add the e-sport to the Olympic game. So I'm kind of curious about your opinion. What do you think? Should e-sport be added to the Olympic Games? All right, you think about, is IOC really need e-sport to increase its popularities around younger generations? Or it may cause some even worse consequence at the end. So that's something I hope you can consider and discuss about it in this class. So one last topic in the Olympic movement we're going to talk about is doping control. Right. So for the IOC, for many years, they have been working very closely with what anti-doping agency is. They try to protect clean athletes by fighting against dopings. So this is basically the top priority for the IOC. Basically, they have a zero tolerance policy to combat cheatings. Some of the new strategy has been utilized by the IOC to indicate that they strongly go against athletes for using performance enhanced drug to improve their performance. Is IOC in the 2008 Olympic Games, so they decided to keep the doping test samples for 8 to 10 years. So which means if you were using performance enhanced drug, competing at Olympic in 2008, but you're winning the medals, and you think, oh, I'm fine, I'm using performance enhanced drug, but it has not been identified by the technology at that time, but you may be able to find out those doping tests result may not be true later on because they will be using the testing doping samples to see whether athletes are using the performance enhanced drugs. So after this policy has been introduced, you find out what? 47 Olympic medalists from the 2008 Games were found using performance enhanced drug, and 34 Olympic medalists from the 2012 London Olympic Games were stripped the Olympic medals because they failed the doping test, right? So IOC using this strategy and rules indicate that they strongly go against the athletes using performance enhanced drug to improve their performance, right? So that is one strategy. Second strategy, some of you might have heard it and have learned it from other classes as well, talking about Russia's systematic dopings, right? So Russia was banned from competing in 2008 Winter Olympic Games due to a state-sponsored doping scandals. So this is the first time in Olympic history that a country was banned from competing Olympic Games due to doping issues. right? So this also become a very big discussion, and also whether IOC should allow Russia to compete in 2020 Olympic Games has also become a pretty big debate as well right now. So there's a lot of news. WADA just released the statement indicate that Russia should be banned for competing all the competition in the next 4 years. But IOC hasn't really responded to that decisions. Again, this is a doping control is one of the big policy in the Olympic sports, which is also going to be the issues that we have to focus on in the future as well. Okay, so those are three issues we'll talk about today. First one, we talk about the Olympic bidding procedures and how the bidding rule has been changed. Which second one, we talk about how IOC has tried to reach out to the younger generation. And the third policy, we talk about the doping control. So the textbook also did mention about a lot of other issues as well. So I hope that you could take some time to read the textbook. And if you have any question about Olympic sports and Olympic governance, please let me know. So don't forget to complete today's online discussion. Today's online discussion, so basically, I want you to talk about if IOC want to add one sport in the 2028 Los Angeles Olympic Games. So which sport would you recommend, and why are you recommending this sport? If IOC want to remove one sport from the 2028 Olympic, which sport should be and why? So you have to give me a legitimate reason to prove your decisions. All right, so this is about Olympic movement, which is also the last lecture for this online class. Shoot me an email if you have any question. I'm going to share more information about the final exams. All right, talk to you later.